the start of the Cold War in 1945, many in the scientific community came to realize that they had made a huge mistake in developing atomic weapons. During the research, a group of scientists began to object to the increasingly dangerous developments. One man stood out above the others. His name was Hans Bethe. Through his essays, articles, and correspondence with influential political figures, Hans Bethe's tireless pursuit of nuclear arms control caused new revelations about the moral responsibility of the scientist, and ultimately led to changes in government policy, culminating in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968. Hans Bethe was born in Germany in 1906. He quickly followed in his father's footsteps, earning his PhD in physics at the University of Munich. Bethe then took a job at the University of Tübingen as a physics professor. In 1933, the Nazis came to power and thousands of Jews were forced to leave Germany. Bethe was fired from his university position because of his Jewish heritage. He sought refuge in England at the University of Cambridge. 2 years later, Bethe came to the United States, where he was offered a position at Cornell University. He accepted the position and quickly rose to prominence within the scientific community. He would later receive a Nobel Prize in Physics for his work at Cornell. During this time, the U.S. government began a new scientific endeavor known as the Manhattan Project. The goal of this project was to develop an atomic weapon for use against Germany. In 1943, Robert Oppenheimer, the leader of the Manhattan Project, invited Bethe to join the Los Alamos staff as the head of the Theoretical Physics Division. This was quite an honor and was a prestigious offer for the young scientist. Although he was at first reluctant, Bethe accepted the offer in his desire to aid the war effort. With the death of Hitler in April of 1945 and the German surrender, the war effort shifted from Germany to the Pacific, where Japan continued to refuse any treaties with the Allied forces. On July 16, 1945, the U.S. tested the first atomic weapon near Alamogordo, New Mexico. It was at this site that Oppenheimer famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita.
And become death, the destroyer of worlds.
However, this scientist continued with the building of nuclear weapons. Recognizing the horrific damage the bombs would cause, Oppenheimer continued the work on the atomic weapons. He understood the drastic consequences that the Manhattan Project would have on the world. He understood the lives he would take, the damage he would cause, and yet he continued. Bethe was also at the test and later described his reaction.
I was exhilarated by our success and terrified by the event.
His reaction foreshadows much greater horrors to come. On August 6, 1945, the Americans dropped the first ever atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. At 8:17 a.m., a specially equipped B-29 Superfortress bomber, nicknamed the Enola Gay, released the atomic bomb. It exploded 43 seconds later, releasing tremendous waves of energy. After seeing evidence of the destruction from the atomic bomb, Bethe realized the disastrous effects of his research, and he resolved to prevent history from repeating itself.
Hiroshima was devastated, and we were devastated as well. And many of us at that point decided that this should not happen again.
3 days later, a second atomic bomb was dropped, this time on the Japanese city of Nagasaki. The bomb dropped over Nagasaki was much larger than the Hiroshima bomb, and the subsequent fallout was much worse.
The unintended consequences of these weapons are that they release a tremendous amount of energy in the form of gamma radiation, as well as a huge flux of neutrons. The gamma radiation is very, very destructive. It will either kill living cells or cause enough DNA change to cause either cancers or later death of that cell. So the gamma radiation caused people in the area of these two weapons to die rather quickly after the explosions. The more delayed effects are caused by this flux of neutrons. People that are in the area of these nuclear explosions at a later time will be ingesting, inhaling these materials, and then they will decay inside of the body of the victim. The term radiation sickness is a fairly broad term. It primarily applies, though, to the death of cells within the victim. In this case, the death of cells is quite massive, and as they decay, they cause, in fact, gangrene, and therefore that gangrenous material has to be isolated from the rest of the living tissue, primarily through amputation, but gangrene in the main torso of a human being is deadly.
Images such as these brought about Bethe's realization that, as he says, this should not happen again. As a result of the devastation, the Japanese quickly surrendered. On September 2nd, the Japanese signed a treaty with the Allied forces, officially ending World War II. Earlier that year, the Allies had come together to divide Germany. Conflict arose over the division of Germany, and a climate of tension grew between the superpowers, namely between the US and the Soviet Union. After World War II ended, American leaders began to worry about how long it would take for the Soviets to create their own atomic bomb. In a 1946 article, Hans Bethe predicted that it would take 5 years for a determined country to develop a nuclear weapon. The Russians did it in 4. By 1949, the Russians had tested their first atomic bomb. The nuclear arms race had begun. One of Bethe's colleagues from Los Alamos, Edward Teller, began to push for the development of a hydrogen bomb in response to the Soviets' rapid progress. The new weapon would be much more powerful than the atomic bomb. His support of the hydrogen bomb would have disastrous effects.
During the fission reaction, which fuels an atomic bomb, atoms heavier than iron are split, breaking apart the nucleus and releasing waves of energy. During a fusion reaction, which takes place in the hydrogen bomb, atoms lighter than iron, usually hydrogen, combine to form heavier elements. Fusion releases much more energy per unit matter than fission, making the hydrogen bomb much more deadly.
Teller went to Bethe, hoping to recruit his old colleague for work on the new superbomb. Bethe turned him down. He fought hard against the development of the H-bomb. In an article published in Scientific American, he states,
I believe the most important question is the moral one. Can we, who have always insisted on morality and human decency, introduce this weapon of total annihilation into the world?
Bethe predicted that such a weapon would only serve to escalate the arms race. He was correct. The development of new technologies such as the hydrogen bomb, long-range missiles, and defense systems only led to further escalation and increased nuclear stockpiles. Each invention added a whole new element of danger to the situation, and as defensive measures became more developed, so did the offensive weapons, leading to the possibility of full-scale nuclear war. Through his written work, Bethe continued to oppose the arms race. In a July 1960 article, he stated,
It has been recognized widely in the United States and also in the Soviet Union that the continued arms race makes no sense. The two countries are fully capable of destroying each other, in fact of destroying each other several times over. This is an absurdity.
Bethe's legacy continued through the 20th century. Bethe's ideas and support for disarmament helped to change government policy, ultimately ending the Cold War. Bethe served on the President's Science Advisory Committee from 1956 to 1964, and also worked on a presidential study of nuclear disarmament. Bethe was also an informal advisor to several presidents, including Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. As an advisor, Hans Bethe assisted the president in determining a diplomatic means of resolving the conflict with Russia. Bethe helped to negotiate the Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963, which banned all tests of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, underwater, and in space. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968 established the mutual goal of total disarmament. The major nuclear powers of the time decided that they all ultimately aimed to reduce their nuclear arsenal. This was a huge step in the direction towards a comprehensive test ban, which Bethe strongly promoted. In a July 1995 letter addressing the entire scientific community, Bethe wrote,
I call on all scientists in all countries to cease and desist from work creating, developing, improving, and manufacturing further nuclear weapons, and for that matter, other weapons of potential mass destruction, such as chemical and biological weapons.
In September of 1996, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed in New York. The CTBT has not yet been ratified, and remains a controversial issue today. In 1997, Hans Bethe, at age 90, wrote a letter to President Clinton calling for the ratification of the treaty. He ends his letter by urging the President to reassure the world that America is vigilant in its desire to ensure that new kinds of nuclear weapons are not created. The words and actions of Oppenheimer and Teller, as well as other scientists, contrasted with Bethe's new ideas of the morality of the scientist and his argument against nuclear arms. His sense of moral integrity endured despite opposition, and he would be looked to as an example for future generations of scientists. Hans Bethe's death in 2005 was a great loss not only to the scientific community, but to the entire world. The scientist was one of the greatest moral forces of the 20th century. As a tribute to Bethe, Sylvanus Schweber, a fellow physicist, spoke of Bethe's extraordinary moral influence. Schweber was one of many scientists who was deeply affected by Bethe's moral commitment.
No one worked harder to bring about the elimination of nuclear weapons and enhance. He indeed became the conscience of the physics community worldwide and a model to the scientific community as a whole as how to address one's responsibility as a scientist given the changing character of the sciences.
Bethe's importance in history has been long-standing. He made people question their moral values. He caused many scientists to consider their research, not only as a piece of science, but as a piece of history.